Who are you? It seems like a simple question. We might answer quickly. I'm a teacher. I'm a mother. I'm Vietnamese. I'm someone who loves music. Or even, I am a spiritual seeker. These responses feel intimate, familiar, even comforting. But if we pause, if we look more deeply, we may notice that none of these descriptions actually capture the totality of what we are. They are roles, memories, preferences, habits. But are they truly you? From the moment we were born, a sense of I has been forming. It began with sensations, hunger, warmth, touch, and slowly it grew as language appeared. Mine, me, I want, I don't like. As the years passed, this identity became more complex. It was shaped by family, culture, society, trauma, success, failure, and millions of tiny moments we may not even remember. This thing we call self feels so solid, but if we stop to investigate it, we begin to see that it's more like a flowing stream than a statue, ever-changing, never quite the same from one moment to the next. Still, we cling to it. We hold tightly to the idea that there is a central me behind the eyes, directing the show, suffering the pain, earning the praise, fearing the loss. This attachment lies at the very heart of our suffering. And yet, so few ever question it. Most spiritual seekers come with the desire to improve the self, to heal the self, to empower the self, but very rarely to look closely at whether the self exists as we think it does. The Buddha's teaching offers a radically different approach. Rather than decorating the self or perfecting it, he invited us to see through it, not to destroy anything, but to discover that there may be nothing solid there to begin with. In the early texts, the Pāli Canon, this insight is called Anattā, commonly translated as non-self or not self. It is one of the three essential marks of reality, alongside anicca and dukkha. But Anattā is not merely a belief to accept. It is a profound insight to realize. It cannot be grasped intellectually. In fact, trying to understand Anattā with only the thinking mind is like trying to grab the wind. It is through direct experience, through inner stillness and careful observation of the mind and body, that this truth begins to reveal itself. It arises not in books, but in silence. What, then, is the self we think we are? What is this voice in our head that says, I am angry, I am lonely, I am right? Is it something real, permanent, and independent? Or is it a mental construction, born from conditions, shaped by memory, held together by craving? The Buddha didn't deny our experience. He simply pointed out that everything we cling to as I is impermanent, changing, and ultimately outside our control. The body gets sick. Emotions rise and fall, thoughts contradict themselves, desires shift like the wind. What we take to be me is a bundle of processes in constant flux. The more we cling to this illusory self, the more we suffer. The more we let go, the freer we become. But let us be clear. The teaching of Anattā is not nihilistic. It does not say you don't exist. Rather, it invites us to see that what we call I is not a thing but a process, and one that is intimately connected to everything else. When we let go of the illusion of a separate, unchanging self, we don't fall into a void, we fall into freedom. We stop defending ourselves, comparing ourselves, fearing for ourselves. We begin to taste the peace that comes from not needing to be anyone at all. This is not an easy truth. The mind resists it. The ego, which is itself a bundle of habits and memories, recoils from the suggestion that it might not be the master of the house. But the Buddha did not teach to comfort the ego, he taught to awaken the heart. He taught a path not toward eternal identity, but toward the end of suffering. So in this journey ahead, we will explore what the Buddha truly meant by non-self. We will look deeply into the 5 aggregates that make up human experience: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, and ask whether any of them, or all of them together, could rightly be called self. We will examine the suttas, the insights of meditative experience, and even reflections from modern science and psychology. But more than anything, we will try to touch, however gently, the place in us that is already free, not because it is a permanent essence, but because it is empty of self and therefore not bound. You don't need to believe in Anattā. You only need to look calmly, gently, and honestly at what you call I. And if you do, you may begin to discover a quiet, unexpected truth. You were never what you thought you were, and that is not frightening. It is the beginning of liberation. In the early teachings of the Buddha, There is no concept more crucial to understanding the illusion of a fixed self than the teaching of the five aggregates, Pancakanda and Pāli. These are the five components that make up what we experience as a living human being: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. When we look at them carefully, not just intellectually, but experientially, we begin to see that what we call I is nothing more than these five impermanent, conditioned processes. Let us explore each of them with careful attention, not as abstract ideas, but as living, breathing aspects of our current moment. Form is the physical body, the material aspect of existence. It includes the four great elements: earth, water, fire, and air, and all material form derived from them. We look in the mirror and think, this is me. This is my face, my body. But what we call my body is constantly changing. Hair grows and falls out. Skin cells die and regenerate. The body ages, weakens, aches, and eventually dies. It responds to food, weather, illness, and injury. If this body is constantly transforming and ultimately beyond our control, can we truly say, this is mine? This is me? We do not own the body. We inhabit it temporarily, like a guest house. And like any guest house, we cannot stop its decay. We can clean it, decorate it, feed it well, but time, gravity, and entropy will have the final word. Feeling refers to the raw sensation of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every moment brings a feeling tone, whether we see a loved one smile or stub our toe on a table leg. Each experience is marked by some flavor of sensation. The moment we feel pleasure, we want to hold on to it. The moment we feel pain, we want to push it away. This is the seed of craving, ta, and craving is born from the illusion that I am the one who feels. But sensations arise and pass without our permission. You cannot control how long a pleasant moment will last. You cannot prevent pain from visiting your body or mind. Feelings are like waves on the ocean, fleeting, insubstantial, not self. If we pay close attention during meditation, we begin to notice how quickly one feeling fades and another arises. There is no single feeler behind the curtain, only a series of temporary impressions that the mind mistakenly weaves into a story of me. Perception is the process of labeling and recognizing. It allows us to identify the color red, to know that a sound is a bird, to distinguish between sweet and bitter, friend and enemy. Perception is built on memory. It categorizes, names, interprets. But how reliable is it? Two people can look at the same cloud and see two different shapes. One might see a lion, the other sees a flower. Is the cloud either of those things? No, it is just vapor in motion. Our perceptions are conditioned by culture, trauma, language, and expectation. Yet we often take them as reality itself. Worse, we assume that our perception is me, that I see it this way, and that this seeing is somehow stable and objective. But perception is conditioned, impermanent, and vulnerable to distortion. When we begin to notice this, we loosen the grip of identification. We start to ask, if perception changes, can it be me? Mental formations are perhaps the most complex of the aggregates. They include all volitional activities, habits, intentions, emotions, and mental states: anger, joy, fear, doubt, confidence. These are the reactions, choices, tendencies that arise in the mind and influence our behavior. Some are helpful, some are harmful. All are conditioned. Your personality, for example, may be gentle today and impatient tomorrow. You may act kindly in one moment and speak sharply in the next. Emotions surge and subside. Thoughts arise in reaction to events, then vanish. These formations are like weather systems moving through the sky of consciousness. When you're angry, it feels like, I am angry. But as the anger fades, so does the sense of a fixed identity. The Buddha taught that these mental states are not mine. They are dependently arisen, subject to change, and ultimately outside of our control. We suffer when we hold on to any of them as who I am. I am an anxious person. I am a failure. I am better than them. These are not truths. They are formations, stories, habits, shadows. They may arise due to past causes, but they do not define a permanent self. As the Buddha said, whatever is of the nature to arise is also of the nature to cease. Finally, consciousness, the knowing faculty. This is the awareness of sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and mental objects. It is what allows you to hear these words or read this sentence. Many people believe that consciousness is the true self, the unchanging observer, the witness behind the scenes. But even consciousness is conditioned. It arises in dependence on sense organs and objects. Visual consciousness arises when the eye contacts a visible object. Auditory consciousness arises when the ear contacts sound, and so on. Consciousness flickers, shifts, ceases when its conditions are no longer present. In deep meditation, one can even watch consciousness become still. It too is not me, because it depends on something else to exist. If something arises only when certain causes are present and vanishes when they are gone, how can it be considered a self? Taken together, the five aggregates make up what we call a person, but none of them is truly a self, and none of them is stable. The Buddha likened them to a burden we carry, mistaking them for our essence. Yet, when we release identification with them, the burden falls, and what is left is peace. In the famous Anattā Sutta, the Buddha asked the early monks, "Is form permanent or impermanent?" They answered, "Impermanent, Lord." Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? Suffering, Lord. Is it fitting to regard what is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change as, "This is mine, this I am, this is myself"? No, Lord. This was not a philosophical puzzle. It was a method of inquiry, a mirror held up to the mind. When we investigate our experience in this way, over and over, we begin to see that there is no owner behind the aggregates. Just processes. Just movement. Just conditions. No self. The illusion of self is built on not seeing these aggregates clearly. But once we do, a crack opens in the wall. A light comes in. And we begin to sense the possibility that freedom is not something we become, but what is revealed when we let go of what we are not. To truly understand what the Buddha meant by Anattā, we must return to the earliest and most reliable source, the Pāli Canon, specifically the Sutta Pitaka, where his discourses were preserved through centuries of oral transmission. These texts are not abstract metaphysical treatises, they are practical teachings meant to liberate the mind. In the canon, the Buddha does not begin with a philosophical argument for why there is no self. Instead, he invites the practitioner to look directly at experience, to observe, inquire, and ultimately realize for themselves the nature of existence. The doctrine of Anattā is not something to believe in, it is something to be seen. In the Anattā Sutta, the second discourse given after the Buddha's enlightenment, the teaching is laid out with profound clarity. Speaking to the 5 ascetics who had formerly practiced with him, the Buddha leads them through a guided examination of the 5 aggregates. For each aggregate, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, he asks the same sequence of questions. Is this permanent or impermanent? They reply, impermanent, Lord. He continues, is what is impermanent? Suffering or happiness? Suffering, Lord. Then the piercing question, is it fitting to regard what is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change as this is mine? This I am. This is myself. And they respond, no, Lord. By the end of the discourse, their insight was so deep that all 5 attained full awakening. This method, simple, direct, repetitive, is a hallmark of the Buddha's approach. He doesn't argue whether a soul exists in some theoretical sense. He doesn't attempt to disprove a metaphysical self floating behind phenomena. Instead, he points to what is observable, the moment-to-moment experience of the body and mind. The self is not denied, it is deconstructed, not by force, but by clear seeing. In another core discourse, the Alagaddapama Sutta, the Buddha strongly refutes both eternalist and annihilationist views of the self. He says, monks, even this view, that the self is not for me, if clung to, becomes a fetter. Here, the Buddha is not offering yet another doctrine to hold on to. He's pointing out the subtle trap of attachment even to the idea of non-self. The goal is not to trade one identity for another, not, I have a self for, I have no self, but to go beyond the duality altogether. As long as there is clinging, whether to identity or to the denial of identity, there is still bondage. The Buddha consistently avoided metaphysical speculation, especially on topics like, does the self exist? Or does the Tathagata exist after death? In the Kamalankya Sutta, he compares such questions to a man shot by a poisoned arrow who refuses treatment until he knows who made the arrow, what kind of wood it's from, and who shot it. The Buddha says such questions are beside the point. The urgency is not to figure out the precise ontological status of the self, but to end suffering. And for that, what matters is not abstract knowledge, but direct insight into the nature of experience. In the Kamaka Sutta, an elder monk named Kamaka, not yet fully awakened, tells the younger monks that although he does not take the 5 aggregates to be self, there is still a lingering sin of I am in his experience. This beautifully subtle teaching shows us that the illusion of self is not merely a conscious belief. It can persist subconsciously, as a feeling, as a reflex, as a deep conditioning that still needs to be penetrated. Anattā, then, is not a single moment of understanding, but a gradual unraveling of identification, layer by layer, until not even a trace remains. The Buddha also made it clear that Anattā was not just a philosophical stance, but an essential part of liberation. In the Bāli Sutta, Bāli is told, in the seen, there will be only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the cognized, only the cognized. When for you there will be only the seen, then, Bāli, you will not be with that. When you are not with that, you will not be in that. When you are not in that, you are neither here nor there nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. What does this mean? When we experience reality as it is, without inserting a self into the process, without clinging or resistance, we are free. Anattā is not a cold void. It is the doorway to a profound and unshakable peace. Even in the Dhammapada, the most widely known Pāli text, the spirit of Anattā is echoed. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. And again, all conditioned things are not self. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. The connection is clear. To see things as not self is not a loss. It is a liberation. It is the ending of a lie, and the revealing of a deeper truth. An important detail is that the Buddha never spoke of a true self hiding behind appearances. Some later schools would reinterpret his silence on this matter as leaving room for a higher self, a kind of ultimate consciousness. But the early texts are remarkably consistent. Whatever is conditioned, whatever is changing, whatever arises and passes away is not self. And there is no exception made for any hidden entity, any subtle eternal core. The realization of nibbana is not the merging with a supreme self. It is the cessation of clinging, craving, and ignorance. The Buddha's teaching of Anattā can be deeply challenging. It goes against centuries of spiritual thinking, against our emotional instincts, against the deep wiring of our psychology. But it is not meant to be grasped quickly. It is meant to be explored, reflected upon, tested through direct observation. This is why the path includes sila, samadhi, and panna. Only a calm, stable, and ethical mind can begin to see the truth beyond ego. And once it is seen, even faintly, the structure of suffering begins to tremble. Because what we call my pain, my fear, my story, is revealed to be just a process, just conditions, just cause and effect. The I was never truly there. And with that insight, the burden of being someone can begin to fall away. This is the Pāli Canon's approach, not to define the self, not to argue for its absence, but to invite us to see clearly, to know deeply, and to let go completely. Not as a leap into void, but as a return to peace. To intellectually understand Anattā is one thing. To experience it directly in meditation is something else entirely. The former is a conceptual map. The latter is walking the path itself. The Pāli texts make it clear that the realization of non-self is not a philosophical conclusion. It is a profound shift in perception, a deep seeing that transforms how one experiences each moment. And this transformation happens, not through belief, but through silent observation, through refined mindfulness and concentration developed in meditation. In the stillness of deep meditation, when the waves of thought begin to settle, when the body becomes quiet and the breath becomes subtle, we start to notice something extraordinary. The things we thought were ours, thoughts, sensations, feelings, memories are simply arising and passing. They come and go like visitors in a house we do not own. One by one, we see that none of them belong to us. A sound arises, there is hearing, but no hearer. A sensation appears, there is feeling, but no owner of the pain or pleasure. A thought forms, there is thinking, but no thinker behind it. The structure of self begins to unravel. This is not always a comfortable experience. At first, it may feel disorienting. We are so used to identifying with everything that passes through our field of awareness that when this identification weakens, the mind may react with fear or confusion. Who am I? If not this voice in my head, what is left if I do not control these experiences? But if we stay present, steady, and curious, without rushing to reattach or to explain, the mind opens to something more spacious. The sense of I am this loosens, and in its place, there is just awareness, bright, boundless, impersonal. The Buddha described this process in the practice of vipassana, clear seeing. With sharp mindfulness, we begin to notice that each experience has three characteristics. It is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. These are not ideas to memorize, but truths to be felt directly. In the Masatipana Sutta, the Buddha instructs the practitioner to observe the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects with awareness and dispassion, contemplating the nature of arising and vanishing. This is the doorway to freedom, not through suppression, not through transcendence, but through direct encounter with what is. When the meditator enters deeper states of absorption, jhana, the sense of bodily identity fades. The usual reference points of self dissolve. In the first jhana, joy and directed attention are strong. By the second, even mental chatter fades. In the higher jhanas, perception becomes so subtle that even time and space begin to lose their hold. In these rarefied states, many meditators report a profound sense of emptiness, not in the negative sense, but as an absence of clinging, of self-reference. There is awareness, clarity, peace, but no sinner, no owner, no me. Yet even outside of jhana, in simple breath meditation, this insight can begin to emerge. Watch the breath come in. Did you choose it? Watch it go out. Can you stop it? The breath breathes itself. The body sits by itself. Sounds appear in consciousness without effort. Thoughts arise on their own, even if we pretend we are the author. And when we stop fighting this reality, when we stop grasping at control or identity, there is a surprising freedom in the letting go. Meditation reveals that the self we defend, polish, and mourn was never more than a habit of thinking. Sometimes people ask, if there is no self, who is meditating? Who is watching? But this question comes from the very assumption we are trying to see through. In meditation, what we discover is that awareness does not need a self to function. Seeing happens. Knowing happens. There is clarity without a knower. The Buddha once described this state as just suffering arising, just suffering ceasing without anyone in the middle of it. Likewise, there is just awareness, pure, luminous, undistorted by the illusion of an observer. Over time, as this insight deepens, the clingings of identity weaken. The meditator may begin to notice that anger no longer feels personal. Sadness, when it arises, is simply a passing cloud, not my depression, but just a mind state conditioned by causes. The joy that blossoms during meditation is not my happiness, it is the result of letting go. This is the gradual unfolding of disidentification, a peeling away of the layers of false ownership. Importantly, this does not lead to indifference or cold detachment. On the contrary, when we stop clinging to the self, the heart becomes more open, not less. Compassion flows more freely because there is no boundary to defend. The Buddha described the awakened mind as one that radiates boundless loving-kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, not from ego, but from freedom. When there is no me, there is no mine. And so the world can be embraced without fear or demand. The experience of Anattā in meditation is often subtle, cumulative. It may come as a moment of insight, a flash of seeing, in which the mechanism of selfing is exposed. Or it may come gradually, as a quiet erosion of the need to be someone. What remains is a lightness of being, a simplicity, a natural responsiveness to life without the burden of narrative. There is action, but no actor. There is experience, but no experiencer. And in that emptiness, there is peace. The Buddha once said that nibbana is the end of craving, the cessation of becoming. In meditation, when the self is no longer propped up by craving, the struggle to become this or that ceases. What remains is not a blank void, but a luminous stillness, a mind free from identity, a heart free from possession. This is not something that happens all at once. It is the fruit of sustained practice, of silent reflection, of courageous looking. But it is possible. And it is the very path the Buddha walked and left open for us to walk as well. In meditation, Anattā is not just a truth to be known. It is a freedom to be lived. The moment we begin to see through the illusion of self, something remarkable begins to unfold. The heavy burden of ownership starts to dissolve. In daily life, so much of our suffering arises from the sense that we own things, our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships, our status, our future. This deep-rooted sense of mine underpins the endless struggle for control, security, and meaning. But from the perspective of the Buddha's insight, there is, in truth, nothing we can truly claim. Not because we should abandon all responsibility, but because when we look closely, honestly, directly, we find that nothing actually belongs to a me. There is no solid entity to possess or be possessed. Letting go of this illusion is not nihilism. It is liberation. In the Pāli Canon, the Buddha repeatedly emphasizes that the five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, are not self and therefore not to be clung to as mine. This isn't just a spiritual opinion. It is a pointer toward direct observation. When pain arises in the body, we reflexively call it my pain, as though there is an owner sitting behind it. But where is this owner? If we truly observe the sensation, we see it comes and goes on its own. It may increase or fade, shift or disappear, regardless of our preferences. The same applies to thoughts and emotions. They arise due to conditions, memories, perceptions, external triggers, internal chemistry. They pass through the field of awareness like clouds passing through an open sky. None can be held. None can be truly claimed. When this is seen clearly, the feeling of ownership begins to collapse. This does not mean we become passive or irresponsible. On the contrary, when the illusion of control fades, our actions become more attuned to reality. Without the constant need to protect or assert me and mine, our responses become more compassionate, more flexible, more grounded. We are no longer reacting from ego, but acting from wisdom. There is a profound difference between engaging with life and possessing life. The former is dynamic and alive. The latter is brittle and tense. The sense of ownership is deeply tied to the illusion of control. We want to be the authors of our experience, to be in charge of what happens to us. But when we examine our lives honestly, we see that much of it unfolds outside our choosing. Did we choose the body we were born with? The cultural context? The early childhood influences? Even our personality traits? Where did they come from? From genetics, from environment, from causes stretching back far beyond this lifetime. The more we look, the more we find that our so-called self is simply a stream of conditioned phenomena, cause and effect unfolding moment by moment. Control, then, is partial at best and illusory at worst. When we release the obsession with control, we touch something far more powerful, surrender to truth. This surrender is not defeat. It is the birth of true freedom. As long as we are caught in identity, in the stories of who I am and what I must become, we are bound by fear, defensiveness, and grasping. We fear loss because we believe we own. We fear change because we believe there is something stable to protect. But once we see that there is no solid me, no enduring mine, then what is there to fear? Loss becomes transformation. Change becomes flow. Even death is no longer the annihilation of something permanent. It is the dissolving of conditions, like a wave returning to the ocean. The Buddha taught that this insight leads to vimutti, release. The heart is released from the fetter of self-view, and with it, from the chains of craving and clinging. The taste of this freedom is described in the canon as asidhu, unshakable, unconditioned, deathless. Not because the practitioner escapes the world, but because they no longer mistake the world for a possession. They dwell in the world like a lotus in muddy water, rooted but unstained. There is a quiet joy that arises when ownership falls away. It is not the joy of acquisition, but the joy of relinquishment. To no longer have to defend an image, prove a point, protect a story, this is relief. It is like laying down a burden you didn't know you were carrying. With this release, the mind becomes light, the breath deepens, the eyes soften. Life is no longer about becoming someone, but simply being here fully, freely, without attachment. Even relationships are transformed by this freedom. Without the self, there is no longer a need to manipulate or dominate others. Love no longer comes with hidden contracts. Compassion no longer requires recognition. We give, not because we must, but because the illusion of separation has thinned. We serve not out of duty, but out of clarity. The boundaries between self and other blur, not into confusion, but into interdependence. At the deepest level, the end of ownership reveals the Buddha's most radical teaching, that nothing is truly ours, not even our suffering. When the sense of I fades, even pain loses its sting. There is discomfort, yes. There are unpleasant sensations, yes. But without the overlay of my pain, the heart remains open. Without resistance, suffering cannot stick. It is like heat passing through space. It touches, but does not burn. To reach this level of insight requires more than understanding. It requires the courage to let go again and again. It requires deep meditative silence, sustained mindfulness, and ethical living. But the reward is immeasurable. As the Buddha said in the Ida Vitaka, there is no fire like lust, no grip like hatred, no net like delusion, no river like craving. But there is no greater peace than letting go. The end of ownership is not the end of life. It is the beginning of a life lived without fear, without grasping, without false identity. It is the doorway to Nibbana, not as a mystical place, but as the extinguishing of greed, hatred, and delusion. What remains is pure knowing, pure presence, pure peace. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to, not a freedom to do whatever we want, but a freedom from the very wanting that binds us. Not a freedom that comes from gaining something new, but from seeing that nothing ever needed to be possessed. The end of ownership is not a loss. It is the great unburdening. It is the beginning of true peace. The culmination of understanding Anattā is not philosophical clarity or even psychological ease. It is the direct, living realization of the unconditioned, the deathless. In the Buddha's teachings, this deathless is not a poetic metaphor or distant promise. It is a reality that can be realized here and now, when the mind ceases to fabricate, cling, and identify. The deathless is not something that we reach by traveling through time. It is uncovered when time itself, the habitual flow of becoming, is interrupted. And it is through the doorway of Anattā, through seeing the self as empty, that the unconditioned can be known. What does it mean to speak of the unconditioned? In Pāli, it is called asakkata, that which is not made, not put together, not born of causes. Everything we normally experience is sakkata conditioned phenomena, arising due to causes, passing when those causes change. The body is conditioned. Thoughts are conditioned. Emotions, beliefs, memories, all of them are woven from previous influences. Even consciousness, as we ordinarily know it, is dependent on contact, attention, and objects. But the Buddha pointed beyond all of this to something radically different, a reality not born of conditions, not touched by arising or ceasing. That is the unconditioned. And it is not accessed by building or accumulating. It is revealed when all clinging ceases. The profound teaching is this: only when the illusion of a self ends does the unconditioned become visible. As long as the mind is entangled in identity, I am this is mine, I must become, it remains trapped in the wheel of conditioned becoming. Even spiritual practice, when driven by ego, becomes just another cycle of becoming. Trying to be the best, trying to achieve enlightenment as a possession, trying to control reality. But when the self is abandoned, not denied, not repressed, but seen through, then the entire machinery of becoming grinds to a halt. In that stillness, that non-grasping, something silent is revealed. Not a thing, not an experience, but a truth too simple for words. The cessation of fabrication, the end of time-bound struggle, the direct knowing of freedom. This is what the Buddha referred to as Nibbana. Not a place, not annihilation, not a mystical realm, but the extinguishing of the fire of craving. The going out of the burning caused by clinging to self. The canon uses strong language for this: asoka, viraga, nirodha, santi. It is not something added to the mind. It is what remains when all delusion falls away. And central to that delusion is the idea of I and mine. Without that illusion, there is nothing to suffer, and no one to suffer. Only awareness, still, luminous, unbound. It's important to understand that this realization does not depend on belief. One does not need to believe in the deathless for it to be true, just as one does not need to believe in silence for silence to exist. The Buddha never asked his disciples to accept these truths on faith alone. He invited them to see for themselves, to sit, observe, Penetrate the layers of clinging and identity until what remains is untouched by birth or death. And again, anattā is the key. Not self is not a doctrine to accept, but a lens to remove distortion. When seen clearly, it becomes impossible to locate anything that is truly me. And with that vanishing, the mind opens to what is beyond me, beyond time, beyond struggle. The arahants, the fully awakened ones, are described in the canon as those who have reached the end of the world, not by traveling outward, but by seeing inward. Their minds no longer fabricate. They no longer build futures based on identity. They are empty of self and therefore full of peace. They live in the world, but not of it. The deathless is not an escape from life, but the truth of life unclouded by delusion. To taste it, even for a moment, is to know that nothing is missing, that suffering was never necessary, that freedom was always here. Paradoxically, the realization of the deathless doesn't come from effort in the usual sense. It doesn't come from striving to attain, because striving implies a self that tries to get somewhere. Instead, it arises from letting go of trying, letting go of control, letting go of needing things to be different. It arises from seeing so clearly that nothing can be held, that the only sane response is release. When that release is complete, the unconditioned shines forth not as an object, not as a high, but as a timeless stillness. A knowing that does not depend on thought. A peace that is not born of circumstance. Even in small moments, the deathless can be glimpsed. When the mind stops chasing. When the breath is simply observed without interference, when a thought arises and passes without clinging, there is a subtle spaciousness. That is the doorway. If we enter it, not with grasping, but with silent receptivity, we step outside the narrative of self. In that space, nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be protected. There is just this awareness, clear and boundless. The Buddha once said, there is, monks and unborn, unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled. Were there not such a state, there would be no escape from the born. Aging, ailing, dying, sorrowing, and defiled. The truth of anattā is what clears the path to that escape. When the self is seen as empty, the deathless is no longer hidden. It was never far away. It was only concealed by the veil of I am. Thus, to understand anattā is not merely to lose something. It is to discover everything. It is to lose the false and uncover the real. And that real is not a new identity, but the end of identity. Not a new belief, but the end of belief. Not a new self, but the profound absence where freedom begins. This is the heart of the Buddha's path, not self-improvement, but self-release, not becoming someone, but letting go of the need to be anyone. And in that emptying, the unconditioned reveals itself, not as a reward, but as what has always been here, quietly waiting beneath the noise. To truly live the truth of anattā, that there is no permanent self to cling to, is not to fall into despair or emptiness, but to discover a rare and radiant kind of beauty, the beauty of being no one. At first, this may sound unsettling. We are so used to measuring our worth by identity, by achievement, by narrative. The modern world encourages us to build ourselves constantly, to define who we are, to assert ourselves in every space. But in the stillness of meditation, in the silence of the inner path, something else begins to shine. When we stop trying to be someone, we start to see reality as it is, fresh, boundless, and deeply intimate. There is a tenderness in letting go, to release the need to defend ourselves, to drop the compulsion to prove our worth, to stop grasping at mine. This is not weakness. It is strength of the most profound kind, the strength to be with what is, the courage to live from the groundlessness of this moment, without clinging to any image, story, or label. This freedom is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, gentle, and immeasurably deep, like a calm ocean beneath a stormy surface. It supports everything without being disturbed by anything. When the self is no longer at the center of experience, life opens up. We begin to relate to the world not from ego, but from awareness. Others are no longer extensions of our needs or threats to our pride. They are simply beings, like us, caught in their own stories, their own pain, their own search. Compassion arises naturally, not because we are trying to be good, but because the walls between me and you have softened. There is no one left to protect, and so we can afford to be kind. Relationships deepen when we are no longer performing. Love becomes lighter, freer, less possessive. We don't need others to complete us. Because we are no longer clinging to the illusion of incompleteness. We are not demanding love to reinforce our identity. We are offering it because it flows through us effortlessly. When the ego steps aside, this is not detachment in the cold sense. It is a warm detachment, the ability to be fully present, fully caring, and yet not owned or controlled by clinging. Even fear begins to dissolve. What is there to be afraid of when there is no self to protect? Death loses its grip, not because we deny it, but because we see that what we took to be me was never truly there to begin with. What dies is not a permanent entity, but a process, conditions changing, energy transforming. Life and death are not opposites. They are movements within the same field. When we understand this, we begin to die each moment with grace. We let each breath die into the next. Each thought dies into silence. Each experience arises and vanishes, and we remain not as someone, but as presence itself. This does not mean that we stop functioning in the world. The body still eats. The mind still thinks. The roles we play, parent, teacher, worker, friend, still unfold. But now, they are worn lightly, like garments on the wind. We don't mistake the clothing for who we are. We don't get lost in the script. Life becomes more like a dance, spontaneous, fluid, sincere. We play our part, and then we let it go. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of living without conceit, without clinging, without delusion. Not numbness, but clarity. Not withdrawal, but wise participation. The mind becomes simple, not simplistic. Clear, not empty. Awake, not agitated. The freedom of Anattā is not an escape from life. It is the ending of distortion, the return to suchness. And there is great joy in this simplicity. A joy not born of stimulation or success, but of intimacy with the moment. When we no longer stand apart from life, trying to control or interpret it, we merge with its flow. We hear a bird and we don't think, I hear a bird. There is just birdsong. We see the sky, and we don't insert a self between the seeing and the seen. There is just sky. And in that immediacy, there is wonder. Even suffering changes. It may still arise, pain, sadness, grief, but it no longer defines us. It no longer sticks. We don't build a story around it. It comes and it goes, like waves on the ocean. We are not the wave. We are the ocean. And so peace becomes possible, not because we eliminate all pain, but because we no longer cling to the idea that pain is happening to me. We no longer amplify suffering by wrapping it in identity. This is why the Buddha's teaching is often described as a path of unbinding. We untie the knots that keep us tangled in self, in past and future, in hope and fear. And in that untying, we discover what was always here, the luminous, boundless quality of awareness itself. Not awareness of something, but awareness as such, open, effortless, without owner. To live this way is to be free in the deepest sense. Not free to do whatever we want, but free from the illusion that we must constantly become something. Free from the inner dictator of I should be, or I must have. It is to rest in the radical sufficiency of the present. To trust that nothing more is needed. To abide in the vastness of not knowing. Without fear. And so we come full circle. The teaching of Anattā is not a denial of life. It is a love letter to reality. It points us beyond the prison of ego, beyond the burden of identity, into a space where everything is allowed, because nothing is possessed. This is the beauty of being no one. It is the beauty of being nothing, and therefore everything. As the Buddha said, Sab Dhamma Anattā. All phenomena are not self. This is not a slogan to memorize. It is an invitation to see, to look directly into the heart of experience, and to discover that the self we clung to so tightly was never truly there. And in that absence, we find what is most real. We find peace, we find compassion, and ultimately, we find the deathless. Not through becoming someone, but through being no one at all.